I used to believe that blood meant something. That family ties, no matter how frayed or strained, had an invisible thread that held us together through storms, silence, and stubborn pride. But the moment I saw my brother smirk at my daughter's stammer, something inside me snapped. Not with rage. Not with fire. With clarity. That's when I stopped believing in threads. And started weaving something stronger. My name is Juliet Morgan, and I've never been the favorite. Not in school, not at work, and definitely not in my family. I was the quieter one. The one who made art when others played sports, who read quietly in the back seat while my brother, Trevor, sang off-key and made everyone laugh. He was the golden boy, the loud laugh at the dinner table, the football star who never really grew up. And me? I was just Jules. Until I became someone's mother. Until I became Grace's mother. Grace was born with a speech delay. At 2, she said her first word, mommy, but it came out as a soft, slow stutter. Mommy. I remember the way her eyes looked at me when she said it. Nervous but determined, like she had wrestled with her own tongue just to give me a gift. By 5, she could string full sentences together, but they were wrapped in pauses and hiccups of sound. Some people flinched when she spoke. Others smiled too widely, like they were trying to encourage a puppy to sit. But I never once saw her flinch at her own voice. She knew who she was. It was the rest of the world that didn't. We had lived in the same town as my parents and brother our whole lives, a small Connecticut suburb where the lawns were manicured and the gossip was brutal. After my divorce, I moved into the upstairs apartment of my mother's old Victorian house. Trevor and his wife, Janine, had bought the house next door, the big one with the triple garage and 2 Labradors. That closeness? It wasn't warmth. It was pressure. Every family dinner was a performance. Trevor bragged about his job in real estate development. Janine talked about their daughter's ballet recitals. My mother would chirp in with proud updates about everyone but me. Grace was rarely mentioned. And when she was, it was always followed by a sympathetic look. The day it really began was my father's retirement banquet. He had been a civil engineer for 40 years, and the town was throwing a formal dinner in his honor. The kind where people wore pearls and pocket squares and used forks in the right order. Grace, now 8, was excited. She had even written a little poem to read aloud at the podium, a tribute to her grandpa, who used to build towers from blocks with her on rainy afternoons. I was nervous. Not for her ability, Grace was brave, stubborn, and brilliant, but for how our family might respond. Are you sure that's a good idea? Trevor asked casually as I helped Grace practice in the kitchen. I mean, a public speech? With her, a condition. My hand froze mid-slice on the apple one was cutting. She's proud of what she wrote, I replied calmly. Right, but maybe just have her hand it in. You know, quietly. Don't want her to get laughed at by the crowd. I looked up at him, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at Grace. And smiling. That smile, that dismissive, crooked little smirk, like he was watching a toddler wobble on a tightrope and waiting for the fall. Grace saw it too. I know she did. She didn't say anything, but her shoulders curled in and her lips pressed together the way they always did when something hurt and she didn't want me to know. She didn't read the poem that night. She sat beside me, hands clenched in her lap, staring at the folded paper in her purse. When my father was called to the podium, the room applauded. Grace clapped 2 small, soft claps. Trevor gave a speech before him, long and loud and full of jokes about Dad's legendary stubbornness. People laughed. They loved him. They always had. And I sat there next to my daughter, my hand on her knee, fury twisting inside me. Trevor had taken something from her, but he didn't know yet. She would take something back. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of anger. Out of planning. I started writing names, making lists, searching for awards, grants, contests, anything Grace could enter that would put her voice front and center. Not to prove Trevor wrong. He wasn't worth it. I wanted Grace to see what I had always seen in her, to give her a moment no one could smirk through, and to make sure he watched. Because some victories don't come with shouts or fists. Some come with applause from a stage they told you to stay off of. The morning after the banquet, I stood at my kitchen table in my robe, a mug of lukewarm coffee going cold beside me, and a blank sheet of paper staring back like it dared me to try. The house was quiet. Grace was still asleep upstairs, and the walls, thin with age, held the silence like a secret. But in my head, a storm. I wrote opportunities at the top of the page in block letters. Underneath, I began listing every single local, regional, or even virtual event I could find that involved student writing, youth speeches, public competitions, and advocacy campaigns for children with disabilities. Google became my battleground, and I typed like a woman possessed. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not yet. I was looking for a spotlight. Not the kind that shines for fame, but the kind that finds a shadow and says, "You belong in the light too." By the time Grace came downstairs in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes and clutching her favorite stuffed fox, there were 7 items on the list. I folded it quickly and tucked it behind the sugar jar. Not because I didn't want her to see it, but because I didn't want her to feel the weight of it. Grace didn't need a crusade. She needed confidence. And my job wasn't to carry her. It was to show her she could fly. That afternoon, after our weekly speech therapy appointment with Ms. Weller, a warm woman with soft eyes and a humming voice, I brought up one of the events casually. "There's this youth writing contest," I said as we buckled our seatbelts. "They're accepting entries from kids between 7 and 12. Theme is a moment that changed me." Grace blinked. "Do I have to R-read it out loud?" "Nope. Not unless you win." She was quiet for a beat. "Then, can I write about Whiskers? When he DD died." My throat caught. "Yes, baby. That would be perfect." Over the next few weeks, something changed. Grace started asking for extra paper at night. She'd stay up a little later, writing stories and poems with more heart than grammar, but I never corrected her. I didn't care if the spelling was off. I cared that the walls were coming down. She wrote about losing her cat. She wrote about missing her dad, not the man himself, but the idea of someone who stayed. And she wrote about the time someone told her she talked weird, and how it made her feel like a window that wouldn't open all the way. I didn't ask who that someone was. I already knew. Meanwhile, Trevor's name continued to ring through town. His company had been nominated for a regional civic award, something he clearly wanted more than air. He'd posted a flyer on Facebook, boasting about his impact on community development. My mother had already RSVP'd to the event. She even emailed me to ask if Grace would like to watch her uncle get recognized. I didn't respond. I had other plans. A month later, Grace's short story won first place. It was a children's writing competition hosted by the State Library Association, small, not televised, but meaningful. The letter came on a Thursday, folded in a bright yellow envelope with gold embossing. Grace opened it slowly, like it might explode in her hands. When she read the word "congratulations," she gasped. Then she ran to me, eyes wide. "I won?" I smiled. "Yes, you did." And when she clutched that letter to her chest, I knew it was just the beginning. Not just of her confidence, but of my plan. I framed the letter that night and hung it on the kitchen wall, right beside my list, which had now grown to 15 entries. Every contest, every opportunity, every spotlight she could stand in. Because Trevor had taken the microphone from her once. He wouldn't get another chance. The next time her name was called in public, he would be in the room. And he wouldn't be able to look away. Trevor had always been good at pretending. Pretending to care. Pretending to listen. Pretending he hadn't said something cruel 5 minutes earlier and didn't understand why everyone was suddenly so tense. He was smooth, charming, and endlessly rehearsed in the role of the successful older brother. But Grace's name? That stuck in his throat like a pill too big to swallow. I noticed it at Sunday brunch. We were at Mom's, sitting around the same table we'd gathered at since childhood. Pancakes, eggs, and fruit salad covered the tablecloth that hadn't changed in years. Grace sat beside me, humming quietly as she drew tiny stars in her notebook. She always brought a pen and paper, her comfort blanket. Trevor had just finished talking, again, about his civic award nomination. How the town council had invited him to speak. How he was up against 2 pretty weak candidates. How he had big plans for the city if people just listened to real doers. Then my mom asked, "And Grace? How's she doing in school?" Trevor was sipping his coffee. He didn't look up. "She's quiet," he said with a short breath, like the word irritated his mouth. "Quiet is okay," I said, placing a hand on her back. "She still, stutters, right?" he added. "Her name is Grace," I said calmly. "And yes, she stutters. She also just won a statewide writing award." That made him pause. Only for a second. Then he leaned back in his chair and gave me that slow, smug grin. "A participation thing, right?" Grace looked up. She didn't say a word, but I saw it in her eyes. A flicker of something sharp. Something tired. I reached over and folded her drawing shut. "No, Trevor. She beat out over 600 kids. It wasn't participation. It was merit." He said nothing after that. Didn't even congratulate her. Because the truth is, Trevor couldn't say her name without remembering the day she almost outshined him and didn't. Now that she was starting to, he couldn't stand the sound of it. Later that week, Grace was invited to speak at a children's book fair as one of their young voices of change. It was her first time being asked to read aloud since the retirement banquet, and this time, she said yes. "I want to try," she told me. "Even if I mess up." "You won't mess up," I said. "I might. But I still want to try." I kissed her forehead. "That's what makes you brave, baby. Not being perfect. Just showing up." She practiced every night for a week. She recorded herself, timed her pauses, practiced how to breathe through the hard syllables. She even chose her outfit days in advance, a light purple dress with tiny blue butterflies embroidered on the sleeves. She didn't want help. She wanted the mic. The book fair was held in the town's civic hall, the same place where Trevor's award ceremony would take place 2 months later. As we arrived, I saw volunteers taping name signs to tables, setting out cookies, and stringing lights across folding chairs. Parents filtered in. Kids flipped through picture books. Grace sat backstage, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her note cards firm in her fingers. Then I saw him, Trevor, in the back, by the refreshment table, chatting up the event organizer. Janine must have dragged him along for their daughter, Lily, who was doing a puppet reading in a different room. But the moment he spotted me and then Grace, his jaw tightened. She saw him too, and to my surprise, she didn't flinch. She turned back to her note cards and whispered her first line to herself. When Grace stepped up to the mic, the room quieted. She stood alone, her shoulders squared, eyes scanning the small crowd. She started slow. "Hi, I'm G. Grace Morgan. I wrote a story called The Planet with Two Moons. It's about feeling different and Ella learning to see the sky in a new way." She stumbled on learning, paused, then smiled, and kept going. By the end of her story, the room was still. Not awkward, not tense, just moved. She had brought them into her world, the pauses, the rhythm, the gentle courage of a girl who refused to let hesitation dim her voice. They clapped for her, truly clapped. And in the back of the room, I turned to look at Trevor. He was staring, expression unreadable, arms crossed. Janine was clapping beside him, tears in her eyes. And for the first time ever, he looked like the quiet one. That night, Grace asked me if we could get her story published like in a real book. I told her we would. But first, we had one more name to add to the list. And a bigger stage to find. If Trevor had known I was submitting Grace's application to the Civic Youth Honor Program, he might have tried to interfere. He didn't. Because people like him don't look back at those they consider beneath them. And that was his first mistake. The Civic Youth Honor Program was a selective state initiative that highlighted young leaders making an impact in their communities. Only 10 students were chosen across the entire state, and the award was presented at the governor's cultural gala the same night Trevor was slated to receive his Regional Development Leader award in the same building. They always like to combine ceremonies, make it easier for donors to network. 2 rooms, 2 stages, 2 spotlights. Trevor had been bragging about that night for weeks, practically handing out copies of his speech before it was even finalized. He'd even told my mother it would be a career-defining moment. He didn't know Grace was about to be on the other stage. And she wasn't just attending. She was competing. The application had been sitting in a browser tab on my laptop for 3 days. I stared at it every night after Grace went to bed, rereading the requirements: letters of recommendation, community involvement, impact essays. I hesitated, not because Grace wasn't qualified, but because I wasn't sure if I was ready to put her back in the same arena as the people who once laughed at her courage. But when I walked past the kitchen and saw her reading aloud to her stuffed animals, pacing, correcting herself gently, and smiling through the struggle, I opened the laptop and started typing. I wrote the first essay myself. Not because Grace couldn't, but because the prompt was about parental influence. I told them about how Grace had turned her stutter into a story, how she helped organize a classroom voice day to let every kid speak without interruption, how she read at the children's book fair with poise that made grown men fall silent. I didn't mention Trevor, but I made sure the judges understood this little girl's voice had been challenged, even dismissed. And she rose anyway. Ms. Weller, her speech therapist, wrote the recommendation. She doesn't just speak, she wrote. She teaches others how to listen. And Grace? She wrote her second essay herself. She titled it, Why I Keep Talking. 2 weeks later, we received the letter. She had been accepted. Out of more than 3,000 students, Grace Morgan, age 8, public school student, poetry contest winner, would receive the Youth Voice Award for personal courage and advocacy. The moment I read the first line aloud, Grace let out the tiniest gasp. Then she covered her mouth, as if afraid the joy might escape too loudly. Do I have to speak again? She asked softly. Yes, I said. You'll have 5 minutes on stage. But this time, you get to say whatever you want. She nodded slowly. I want to say thank you to the people who helped me. Then after a long pause, she added, and maybe, a little something to the people who didn't. I didn't have to ask what that meant. She wasn't out for vengeance. She just wanted to be heard. That weekend, Trevor hosted a barbecue. I went, not out of obligation, but curiosity. He was still floating on clouds, talking about the award night as if it were an Oscar ceremony. You're coming, right? He asked, flipping a burger. I wouldn't miss it, I said, sipping my iced tea. He smiled smugly. You know, they're giving me the closing speech slot. Pretty rare. But I guess they recognize real talent when they see it. I smiled back. I'm sure someone else will surprise them. He didn't even catch it. Because Trevor never sees what's coming. Until it's already standing under the spotlight. A week before the gala, Grace stood in front of the living room mirror holding a rolled-up paper towel tube like it was a microphone. Good evening, she said slowly, her voice catching just a little. My name is Grace. Grace M. Morgan. She paused, then started again. And again. And again. I sat on the couch, silent but smiling, pretending to scroll through my phone while my heart nearly burst from pride. She hadn't given up once. We'd gone shopping 2 days earlier to pick out a dress. She wanted something not too shiny and with space to twirl if she needed to. We found it in the clearance rack, soft sky blue with a silver sash, and when she twirled in the dressing room, I swear time stopped for a moment. It's like a brave dress, she'd said. Like armor. Now, every evening after dinner, she rehearsed in it. Not just the speech. The whole moment. The walk. The smile. The breaths between words. She wasn't just preparing. She was owning it. I emailed the gala organizers and confirmed her speech slot. They told me Trevor's acceptance speech would be in the adjacent ballroom 20 minutes after Grace's. Some guests like to move between both ceremonies, the coordinator said. That gave me an idea. The next morning, I wrote out 10 invitations on thick cream-colored cards and mailed them one by one. To my mother, to Janine, to Trevor, to every cousin, uncle, and aunt who'd ever looked past Grace like she was wallpaper. The heading was simple. You're invited to witness a voice worth hearing. Grace Morgan, Youth Voice Award speech. Governor's Cultural Gala, Room V1. 7 p.m. sharp. I didn't add any explanations. No pleading. No background. If they wanted to come, they'd come. If they didn't, they'd hear about it later. The day before the gala, Grace surprised me. We were sitting on the floor, eating popcorn and folding her speech note cards, when she looked up and said, "Can I say one line about Uncle Trevor?" I paused, my hands mid-fold. "What would you want to say?" She thought about it, then whispered that even when people laugh at you, it doesn't mean you're not worth listening to. I stared at her for a long moment. "Grace," I said, "you don't have to say that. You don't owe him anything." "I know," she said softly, "but I want to. For Em and me." It wasn't about revenge for her. It was about reclaiming the moment he tried to take. The night before the event, she gave her final rehearsal. I turned the living room into a makeshift stage. A lamp in the corner became her spotlight. Her stuffed animals sat in a row like an adoring crowd. I sat cross-legged on the rug, holding my phone to record her. She stood tall, took a breath, and began. She stumbled twice, paused, breathed, then delivered a closing line that punched the air right out of my lungs. I used to think my stutter was a problem I needed to fix. But it taught me something important, that courage doesn't mean sounding perfect. It means speaking anyway. Silence. Then I clapped. Loud and long. Grace grinned, cheeks flushed, and whispered, "Was that okay?" I wiped my eyes before answering. It was perfect. That night, as I tucked her in, she asked, "What if he laughs again?" "He won't," I said gently. "And even if he does, you'll be too far ahead for it to matter." She nodded. Her small hand curled around mine under the blanket. "You're gonna be amazing tomorrow," I whispered. She smiled. "I'm already amazing." And with that, she fell asleep. While outside, the moon hung low and soft in the sky, ready to witness the rise of a voice once told to sit down. The sky was bruised with lavender and gold as we drove to the venue, the kind of sky that felt like it was holding its breath. Grace sat in the back seat in her blue dress, the fabric glowing faintly in the fading light, her fingers twitching nervously around her note cards. Her hair was tied back with a silver ribbon, and her shoes, new but sensible, clicked softly every time she tapped her heel on the mat. "You okay?" I asked as we pulled into the parking lot. She nodded, then whispered, "My stomach feels like popcorn." I smiled. That's how you know something important is about to happen. The venue was already humming when we entered. String music drifted through the air, mixed with laughter and clinking glasses. People in suits and gowns milled about beneath chandeliers, name tags pinned like badges of status. Room B1 was off to the right, smaller, quieter, lined with rows of white folding chairs facing a modest podium. We were early. Grace wanted to walk the stage one more time. The organizers welcomed her with warm smiles and soft encouragement, and one of the volunteers brought her a bottle of water with a handwritten note on it. "You've got this, Grace." She read it 3 times before smiling. By 6:45, the chairs began to fill. Teachers, librarians, parents, kids from the other award categories. But I kept glancing at the row I'd reserved in the second section, right near the middle. 10 seats, all clearly marked with name cards. Trevor, Janine, Mom, Dad, Aunt Lisa, Uncle Barry, Lily, Cousin Nate, Cousin Hope. Reserved for family. Empty. Every one of them. I looked at the clock, 6:51 p.m. I looked at the door. And then I stopped looking. Because Grace was standing near the side curtain, eyes closed, repeating her first line to herself. She didn't need them to walk in for her to walk up. At 7:03, the host stepped up to the mic. She introduced the program, thanked the sponsors, and gave a brief overview of the Youth Voice Award. Then she said, "Tonight, we honor a young writer whose courage and clarity have moved every one of our judges. Please welcome Grace Morgan to the stage." Applause broke out. Grace walked slowly, shoulders square, head high. Her dress shimmered with each step. When she reached the mic, she paused, took a breath, and began. Good evening," she said softly. "My name is Grace Morgan. I'm 8 years old, and I'm here to talk about courage." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. She told them about her love for writing, how she used to be afraid to speak, how she once wanted to stay quiet forever because of something someone said. She never named names. She didn't have to. The message was clear. Sometimes people laugh because they don't know what courage looks like. But now, I do. It looks like Essa saying the words anyway. I don't remember breathing during the 5 minutes she spoke. I only remember the stillness of the room and the tears in my eyes. When the final line came, she said it without a stutter. My voice is mine. I'm not sorry for it anymore. The applause was immediate. Loud. Sincere. People stood. Some whistled. The host walked up and hugged her. Grace blinked like she didn't believe what was happening. Then she turned to find me in the crowd. I was already there, waiting with open arms. And as I wrapped her in the tightest hug I'd ever given, I whispered, "You were brilliant." She whispered back, "They didn't come, did they?" "No," I said. "They didn't." She paused. Then said, "That's okay. I think I liked it better this way." 10 minutes later, as the room emptied and we took photos by the podium, I saw Trevor, standing in the hallway between the two ballrooms, holding a program in his hand. He wasn't looking at us. He was watching a small screen broadcasting the award speeches for overflow guests. And on the screen, Grace was still talking. He stared at it like it was in another language. Then he walked away. He didn't speak to us that night. Not a word. But I knew what I saw on his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was something he didn't recognize. Respect. And maybe, just maybe, shame. The next morning, I expected the house to feel quieter. But it didn't. It felt charged. Like something had shifted, subtle, invisible, but undeniable. Grace walked down the stairs with her shoulders straighter. She didn't hide behind her notebook. She didn't mumble when she asked for cereal. There was a lightness in her steps I hadn't seen in a long time. Whatever fear had lived in her chest, it had moved out. While she ate, I opened my laptop to check emails. Buried between a teacher newsletter and a grocery coupon was a message with the subject line. Grace's speech was the highlight of the gala, from a local reporter named Naomi Ruiz. I clicked it open. "Hi, Juliet. I cover community events for the Connecticut Voice and was at the Civic Gala last night. I didn't plan to write about the Youth Awards until I heard Grace. I was moved. Would you be willing to do a short phone interview today? I'd love to share her story." Naomi. My heart flipped. The Connecticut Voice had a readership across the entire state. The kind of publication that landed on coffee tables in school offices, libraries, and even government buildings. Grace had made it to the stage last night. Now she was about to make it into the world. I called Naomi after I dropped Grace off at school. She was warm, sharp, and genuinely moved by what she'd seen. She didn't just speak, Naomi said. She held that room in her hands. She asked about Grace's journey, how long she'd been writing, whether she understood the power of what she said. I kept my answers honest, emotional, but measured. I didn't want it to sound like I was trying to build a brand around my daughter. This wasn't about clicks. It was about being heard. Naomi promised to send a preview before it went live. 2 days later, the article dropped. The headline stopped me cold. Grace Morgan, 8, redefines courage at Civic Gala, a voice that can't be ignored. The photo showed Grace behind the podium mid-sentence, blue dress softly lit under stage lights. And the first paragraph? At 8 years old, Grace Morgan doesn't speak like most children. She stutters. She pauses. But at the governor's cultural gala, she did what many adults never will. She stood in front of a crowded room, told her truth, and left everyone breathless. The article was everything I hadn't known we needed. And by noon, it was everywhere. Teachers from Grace's school emailed. Classmates' parents shared it on Facebook with captions like, "So proud of this brave girl," and "We need more kids like her." Even Ms. Weller printed it and taped it to the wall of her speech therapy office. But the real surprise came at 3:17 p.m. My phone buzzed. "Mom, Mobile just saw the article. You should have told us." She deserved more support. She was incredible. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because it was praise, but because it came with no apology, no ownership. Just passive regret, the kind that tries to slip back into your life like it never left. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in what they thought now that the world thought differently. That evening, Trevor showed up at my front door. No warning. No text. Just standing there in his fleece jacket like he hadn't been avoiding me for 2 months. "Hey," he said, rocking on his heels. "You got a second?" I opened the door slowly. Is everything okay? He cleared his throat. I saw the article. And? She was good. I mean, really good. Silence. I didn't feel it. He looked down, then back up. I didn't know she could do that. I didn't know she'd want to. She always wanted to, I said flatly. You just never listened. His eyes dropped again. I guess I messed up. Guess so. Then, almost too quietly, think she'd want to see Lily's drawing sometime? She made one after the article. Said Grace looked like a superhero. My arms stayed folded, but my voice softened. I'll ask her, but don't expect her to pretend nothing happened. He nodded. I wouldn't. And then, as he turned to leave, he said something I never thought I'd hear from my older brother. Tell her. I'm proud of her, even if I didn't act like it. When I told Grace that night, she didn't smile. She just nodded and said, okay. Then she added, can I hang the article next to my PP poster? I helped her tape it right beside the framed award letter, the one that started it all. And as I tucked her into bed, she whispered something that echoed deep inside me. Do you think other kids will talk now, like I did? I brushed her hair back gently. I think they already are. There's a strange silence that comes after your child changes the world, not a loud, thunderous shift, but a stillness, like the whole sky is holding its breath, watching what they'll do next. That was our house in the days following the article. No more rehearsals. No more kitchen speeches. No more backhanded comments from relatives trying to mask their shame behind compliments. Just peace. And then, something even more unexpected arrived. It came in a plain white envelope, tucked between an electricity bill and a flyer for carpet cleaning. No glitter, no stamp of royalty. Just a return address from Washington, D.C. I nearly threw it out, thinking it was junk mail, until I saw the name in the upper right corner. National Foundation for Youth Advocacy and Leadership. I opened it carefully, heart ticking just a little faster. Inside was a letter, printed on elegant ivory stock. Dear Ms. Morgan, on behalf of the National Foundation for Youth Advocacy and Leadership, we are proud to inform you that Grace Morgan has been nominated for the annual Rising Voices Award, given to young individuals making a measurable impact through courage, advocacy, and leadership. This year, we received over 5,000 nominations from across the country. Grace's story and her speech at the Connecticut Civic Gala were brought to our attention by multiple sources. We are honored to include her as one of our 3 finalists to be recognized at our National Summit in Washington, D.C. Travel and lodging will be covered for Grace and a guardian. The event will be broadcast nationally. Please confirm attendance by October 12th. Warm regards, Kristen Yang, Chair, Youth Recognition Committee. I sat down slowly, then read it again, and again. When Grace came home from school, I didn't hand her the letter right away. Instead, I sat her down at the kitchen table, poured us both apple juice, and slid the envelope across the table like it held a treasure map. She opened it carefully. Her eyes scanned each line, mouth forming silent words, lips trembling slightly. Then she looked up at me stunned. They want me to go to Washington? I nodded, trying not to cry. They want the whole country to hear you. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, will there be a microphone? There will. She smiled wide. Good. I like the mic now. The next few days felt like a dream. I took time off work. We applied for a passport card just in case. Ms. Weller helped Grace shape a new speech, one that told not just her personal journey, but the message she wanted to leave with other kids who were told to fix their voices. And as we prepped for travel, something incredible started to happen. Local news picked it up again, this time with the headline. From stutter to spotlight, Grace Morgan heads to D.C. to represent youth advocacy. Our neighbor, Mrs. McCall, came by with a card and a small donation toward Grace's speech shoes. The school hosted a little celebration with balloons and cupcakes. Even kids who once giggled behind Grace's back now stood in line to high-five her. Grace didn't say much in response. But that smile, that quiet, confident smile, said everything. And then came another surprise. Trevor showed up again. This time, not alone. He brought Lily. They stood on the porch, Lily holding a framed drawing of Grace behind the podium, stars swirling around her like she was made of moonlight. "I drew this from the article," she said shyly. "Can I give it to her?" Grace took it gently, her fingers trembling a little. "Thank you," she said. "Ella love it." Trevor cleared his throat. We'd like to come to D.C. If that's okay." I looked at Grace. She paused, then nodded. "Okay, but only if you promise and no talking during my speech." Trevor chuckled, almost nervously. "Deal." And for the first time in years, there was no tension between us. Just space. Space that maybe, finally, could hold something better. That night, I hung Lily's drawing next to Grace's award letter. The kitchen wall had become a shrine, not to achievement, but to something much rarer. Proof. Proof that a girl who stuttered could be heard across the nation. Proof that the quietest voices can echo the loudest. Proof that when you stand your ground with kindness and courage, even the ones who once laughed. Listen. Washington, D.C. smelled like polished marble, fresh rain, and something electric in the air, the kind of scent that made you walk a little straighter, like you were stepping into something bigger than yourself. Grace clutched my hand tightly as we exited the airport, her blue backpack bouncing against her side. She had packed her speech in a folder with glittery stickers, her stuffed fox tucked safely inside, and the same silver ribbon she'd worn at the state gala looped carefully around her ponytail. She didn't say much that evening, just stared out the hotel window at the Capitol dome, eyes wide. "I thought it'd be taller," she whispered. "You're taller," I replied, wrapping my arm around her. "In every way that matters." The morning of the summit, Grace woke up early, far too early, and asked if she could practice one more time. We cleared a space in the hotel room, angled the desk lamp to mimic a spotlight, and I sat cross-legged on the floor while she ran through her speech again. She only stumbled once, but she didn't stop. She smiled through it, owned it, like it was part of the story, which, of course, it was. The auditorium was grand but intimate. Velvet seats, a polished wooden stage, and a sea of strangers who had only read her name in a program. I could feel their curiosity, maybe even their skepticism. Who was this little girl with the stutter who'd flown all the way from a tiny town in Connecticut? She didn't look extraordinary. She didn't sound powerful. But that was the point. Grace didn't walk onto that stage with the ease of a child who had always been praised. She walked like someone who had once been laughed at and decided to speak anyway. When they called her name, the room was respectfully quiet. A few polite claps, some smiles. But when she took the podium, everything changed. "My name is Gigi Grace Morgan," she began. "I'm 8 years old. I live in a small town with a long name." A few gentle chuckles. "And when I was littler, someone laughed when I talked. They said I sounded broken." Silence. "But here's what I know now." She paused, looked out across the room like she was talking to one person. "I'm not broken. I'm a person with a different rhythm. And my rhythm has something to say." She went on to tell her story, not with rage, not with revenge, but with clarity, with peace, with power. When she finished her final line, "My stutter is not a mistake. It's the sound of me becoming brave." The room rose. Not a polite standing ovation. A true one. The kind that shakes the floor. Afterward, people lined up to meet her. Parents, teachers, even a few reporters. One woman, eyes misty, said her son had hidden his speech problem for years. But after watching Grace, he said he wanted to try the mic too. Grace listened to every word, nodded, smiled, said thank you with quiet strength. She didn't see what I saw. The ripple. She was becoming a movement. Backstage, as she sipped orange juice and leaned on my shoulder, I felt my phone buzz. A message from Trevor. Just watched the live stream. She was everything. Then another. Can't believe the little girl I ignored just got a standing ovation in D.C. Then, you did good, Juliet. Really good. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. She did good. I just made space. That night, Grace fell asleep with the certificate beside her pillow, whispering the speech one last time in her sleep. And for the first time in years, I felt something settle in my chest. Not pride, not relief, something deeper. Peace. 2 weeks after we returned from Washington, the world seemed quieter again. But not in the way it had before. It was the calm of a room after a storm has passed, not destruction, but transformation. Things were still in place, but none of them felt the same. Especially not Grace. She walked into school that Monday like she had always belonged there, no longer shrinking when the teacher called on her, no longer burying her voice under a whisper. She read aloud when asked. She joined a poetry club. She even volunteered to lead the morning announcements one Friday, stumbling twice, but laughing it off with the kind of self-acceptance I used to pray she'd one day find. She'd earned her voice. And now she was using it. Then, out of nowhere, the phone rang. I answered between folding laundry and packing lunches. The voice on the other end introduced herself as Melissa Barron, Director of Youth Engagement for a national nonprofit. I was at the summit in D.C., she said warmly. Grace's speech stayed with me. We're forming a junior advisory panel, kids between 8 and 14, to help shape our outreach. We'd love Grace to be one of the founding members. I nearly dropped a sock. Wait, like a rail board? With voting privileges, Melissa chuckled. We want their input to guide our school programs and campaigns. Grace's perspective, especially her empathy and presence, would be invaluable. I smiled so hard it hurt. She'd be honored. Truly. Grace didn't say much when I told her. She just nodded slowly, thoughtful. I get to help other kids like me, she asked. Exactly. She paused. Then I want to do it. Even if it's scary. That had become her mantra lately. Even if it's scary. The story didn't stop there. A week later, I received another message. This time from a state representative's office. Apparently, Grace's speech had been mentioned during a youth inclusion bill discussion on the House floor, and one of the aides had tracked me down. She inspired the language in a new education clause. The email read, "We'd like to invite her, and you, to speak on a panel about inclusive curriculum." I read the message 3 times, stunned. I used to beg administrators just to give Grace more time to speak in class. Now they were asking her to shape policy. But it wasn't just Grace whose world had shifted. It was mine too. For years, I'd put myself second. Third, even. Behind bills. Behind work. Behind my daughter's therapy schedules. But now, as doors opened for her, I felt a pull I hadn't felt in years, a calling of my own. I started drafting articles, pieces about parenting children with speech differences, about how to advocate for them in hostile systems, about the way shame is passed down like heirlooms if we don't stop it. And then I did something wild. I submitted one to a parenting magazine. 2 weeks later, they published it. Title: My daughter wasn't the one who needed to change, we were. It resonated. It spread. And suddenly, I had a new inbox full of parents, teachers, and speech therapists reaching out. For the first time since I became a mother, I felt like more than a survivor. I felt like a leader. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, I ran into Trevor at the grocery store. He looked different, tired, maybe a bit older. But there was something softer in his voice. I read your article, he said, reaching for a bag of apples. You did. He nodded. Twice. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, Lily asked if she can have a voice like Grace someday. I smiled. She already does. You just have to listen. Trevor looked down, then back up. I wish I had earlier. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was recognizing the gap. And maybe, just maybe, trying to cross it. As I walked away, my phone buzzed again. It was Grace. A picture. She was sitting at a round table with 5 other kids on a Zoom call, the advisory panel. Her caption read, My first meeting. I told them stutters are just pauses in poetry. I stared at it, heart full. She hadn't just reclaimed her voice. She'd created space for others to find theirs. Autumn had arrived like a quiet exhale, leaves dusting the sidewalks in golden curls, the air sharp enough to tingle your lungs. Grace had taken to wearing scarves now, even when unnecessary. Writers wear scarves, she said, tying one around her neck before school like a miniature literary icon. She was still 8, but not really. Not after everything. The invitation came in a crisp white envelope with gold trim, tucked beneath the day's mail. This one wasn't from a school or a nonprofit. It was from the Regional Business Excellence Committee. I nearly choked on my tea. Trevor's Circle. Inside, a formal letter addressed Grace by name. Dear Ms. Grace Morgan, we are pleased to invite you to serve as the official youth presenter for our 2025 Community Legacy Award, to be held at the annual Business Leaders Gala. This year's recipient is Trevor Morgan, recognized for his entrepreneurial contributions and civic engagement. Given your impact across the state and your role as an emerging youth advocate, we believe your presence will elevate the ceremony and inspire others. Your role would include a 2-minute speech introducing the honoree. We are aware of your personal connection and only extend this invitation with full respect for your comfort. Please respond by the 15th. We'd be honored to have you. Warm regards, Dr. Charles Brandt, Event Chair. I sat in silence for a full 5 minutes, then walked the envelope upstairs to Grace's room. She was working on her poem of the week, a habit she'd picked up since D.C., and barely looked up when I knocked. Letter for you, I said softly. She took it, opened it, read, paused, then looked up at me. They want me to speak for Uncle Trevor? I nodded. Only if you want to. She thought for a long time, then said, I don't want to say nice things that I don't mean. You don't have to. She nodded again. But I do want to speak. I raised an eyebrow. You do? She grinned. I've got something to say. She wrote the speech herself. 2 minutes. No more. She practiced in front of the mirror for 3 days. When I asked what she was going to say, she just winked. You'll hear it when they do. The night of the gala was everything you'd expect from a local business awards show. Crisp tablecloths, name cards, soft jazz humming in the background, and egos dressed in designer suits. Trevor looked nervous. I could tell from across the room. He spotted us but didn't wave. Just swallowed hard and straightened his tie. Grace was calm. More than calm, poised. She took the mic like it belonged to her. And then she spoke. Good evening, she began, steady and clear. My name is Grace Morgan. I'm 8 years old. And tonight, I get to talk about legacy. People leaned in. A legacy isn't just a list of things you've built, or awards you've won, or how many people clap when your name is called. She paused. A legacy is also what people remember when you were the only one in the room who could have stood up, but didn't. You could hear a pen drop. Sometimes, she continued, people learn too late that their silence taught others how to stay small. Trevor stared at the floor. But sometimes, she said gently, people try again. And that matters too. Then she turned to face him. So, congratulations to my Uncle Trevor. For what he's built. And for trying to be better. Polite applause. Then rising. Not thunderous, but real. Earned. Trevor stood slowly, his face pale but respectful, his hands slightly trembling as he accepted the award from the same niece he once told to be quiet. He didn't speak long, but when he did, the first words he said were, "Thank you, Grace, for saying what I couldn't." Later that night, as I buckled Grace into the car, she asked, "Did I go too hard?" I laughed softly. "No, sweetheart. You went just right." She looked out the window, then smiled. "Good. I don't want revenge. I just want the truth to echo." And echo it did. Across rooms. Across years. Across people who once thought she'd never speak at all. A year later, if you walked into Grace's room, you'd think you were stepping into a museum of milestones. The framed article from Connecticut Voice. A photo of her standing at the D.C. summit, mouth mid-speech, eyes steady. A drawing from her cousin Lily, Grace with a cape, standing on a stage made of stars. And right in the center, between the fairy lights and the corkboard, a single quote printed in block letters. Courage doesn't sound perfect. It sounds like trying anyway. She came up with that line herself. It had ended up on a school mural, 3 newsletters, and, most surprisingly, on a bumper sticker sold at a speech therapy conference. But for me, it lived deeper than words. Because I knew the echo behind it. I'd watched it ripple. Our life didn't become a movie script after all that. There were still bills to pay. Still dishes in the sink. Still days where the alarm didn't go off and we ran out of clean socks. But the difference? Grace wasn't shrinking anymore. She stood tall, voice or no voice. And so did I. By spring, the advisory panel she joined had helped launch a national awareness campaign about childhood speech diversity. Grace's voice featured in a promotional video that played during the National Educators Summit, a 10-second clip where she smiled shyly and said, "I talk different. And I still have something to say." That line alone inspired dozens of letters from teachers around the country. Even the Secretary of Education reposted it with the caption, "This is why we listen with our hearts, not just our ears." Back in our town, something else had shifted. Grace was no longer the kid with the stutter. She was Grace, the kid who stood up, who stood out, who told the truth even when her hands shook. And people, especially the ones who once didn't know how to treat her, started making space instead of noise. As for Trevor, he changed too. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough. He started volunteering at the local literacy center. He apologized not just once, but in actions, showing up, listening, supporting. And when his company hosted their next community event, they asked Grace to open with a poem. She said yes, but only after they agreed to donate to her school's speech program. She was 8, going on 40. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Grace and I sat on the porch. She was drawing a comic, a superhero girl who froze villains by speaking the truth. I watched her quietly, then asked, "Do you remember what it felt like when they laughed at you?" She nodded. "But I remember more how it felt when I kept going." She looked up, eyes steady. "That's what stays." I smiled, heartful. Because in a world where everyone is shouting to be louder, to be more, to be heard, my daughter taught me the most powerful sound of all. The voice that keeps going. Even when no one claps. Even when they laugh. Even when the room goes silent. Because sometimes, that silence means they're finally listening.